Welcome to my sewing room. I'm Kelly and you found me here on Pick and Stitches, and today we're going to be working on block number 6 of the Pieceful Basket Quilt Along. This is a pattern that comes every month in the Sew Sampler box. You can also purchase it separately at the Fat Quarter Shop. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description if you'd like to buy it that way. So I can't give you the exact cutting instructions. We're going to go piece by piece and get this whole thing put together. So stick around and let's see how it comes out. Okay, so we've got all of our pieces cut out, laid out the way that they say in the instructions. A lot of times I do skip cutting things on the diagonal to start, but this time I'm going to follow the instructions. So I've got my 2 pieces, S and N. These are going to turn into our hourglass shapes. So I thought this was a perfect chance for me to use my new rotating cutting mat. So we're going to go corner to corner and cut this into quarters. Okay, so now we've got all of our piece ends ready to go. And now we're going to do the same thing for S. And someone asked me if the mat rotates. Once you put weight on it, it will still rotate. So if you are not like pushing straight down, you could create a position where it would start to rotate. But because I'm pressing down on the ruler and I'm using my rotary blade just against it, I'm not having any issues with it. Okay, so now I'm going to throw these on a design board so that I can make sure and get all my orientations correct. And since these are all on the bias, I am going to pin. This is just one of those things where it's going to have a tendency to stretch. I did starch this fabric. I starched my whole bundle before we even got the kit, before we got the first block. So I'm going to pin all 4 of these together and then we'll go over to the machine and sew them. And when I sew them, I do like to start on this 90-degree corner instead of on these little corners. These can get a little bit fiddly if they're the first thing through your feed dog. So we'll keep that in mind as we feed it through. So again, I've got my 4 pieces. We're going to sew them. I'm going to start on this 90-degree corner to make it easier to go through the feed dogs. We're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam. We are going to be pressing this open, so I am going to keep my stitch length down at like a 2, and off we go. Now this one, as it wants to feed through, it would want to come these points first. I'm going to make sure that I am probably just going to move these pins to the back so that I'm sewing that 90-degree edge first, because that's just so much easier to walk through those feed dogs. And I could have pinned it that way, I just forgot. Okay, same thing here. Just bump my pins to the other side so I can hit it on the 90-degree. Just going to cut those apart. You could do it with a pair of scissors. I like this because it just doesn't take any extra hands. So first I'm going to set my seams. And then I'm going to press it open. Doesn't matter which side because I'm going to press this entire seam open in just a minute. So I'm just trying to get that first press done. So next I'm just going to trim off my little dog ears here. That way I don't have to trim it twice. And then we'll press it open. And then we're going to build out the rest of our blocks. So we will just take this to the machine. I'll pin it and then we'll sew those together. So if you're concerned about how to get those seams to line up, you just want to take it, hold it, look at it. And then I like to throw a pin on both sides of these seams when they're pressed open like that. Now this is going to be sewing on a smaller corner, so we're just going to be careful as it feeds through the machine because we have to start on a corner now. That's one. Then we've got our other one, just like to double check and make sure I don't pin the wrong two together. It's usually not the first block I do that with. It's usually like if I'm making an entire quilt with the same block, it's like the 5th or 6th one. I think I've got it all down pat and I stop paying such close attention. And that's when I mess it up. All right, so I'm going to be extra careful. Okay, let's go press it open and have a look. Okay, so we'll cut this part, set our seams, press it one way just like we did before. Trim off my corners. And we'll press it open and set it under the clappers while we work on the next part. Okay, next we're going to take piece O and piece M. We're going to make a line. You can either make a line with a ruler right down the middle and sew 1/4 of an inch away. I like to use this quilter's ruler. It just kind of automatically is going to give us that 1/2 inch gap. And I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch from the center line here. I'm going to put these right sides. Oh, I already had that one marked. Haha. And then we're going to sew this together. So I'm going to pull my stickers off so I don't get them stuck in the seams. Okay, so we'll go to the machine and we'll sew that together. All right, so I don't want to use this foot when I am not sewing along the seam. So I'm going to switch that out really fast. And I'll probably flip back and forth. I'm just trying to kind of test out that foot a little bit more. I generally use, this is my go-to that I use all the time, and it's because I don't have to switch it in and out. So, all right, we'll go take this, press it apart. Okay, so I'm going to set my seam. Then I'm going to cut these into 2 pieces and we'll press them open. I'm going to snip my corners and press those seams open as well. Okay, so this one's going to require a little bit more laying out. So we're going to take our U piece. We're going to have it diagonally this way. Then R is going to sit right on top of it so that our long straight sides are together. Then we'll match up the next piece of U, and finally our final piece of R. So that's going to make up our half triangle. So we're going to pay really close attention to that. And I'm just going to go over to the machine and sew these in order. So first I'm going to sew these two together because that gives me a nice 90-degree corner to play with, just like we did on our hourglass blocks. All right, so I'm just going to sew those two lines together. Okay, we'll head over to the machine and press that open. We'll set our seams, press to one side, and then I'm going to press these open. Snip off our little corner. Press it the rest of the way open. Blue towards the bottom, and then the blue towards our white. So now we're going to take this over to the machine, stitch it together. Okay, so now we're just going to sew these two triangles together, starting at that 90-degree intersection again. Okay, so now we'll press this open. First, I'm going to press it just like we've done one way. Snip off my corner. And then I'll press it all the way open. Okay, so now we have one more seam to finish out this square. We're going to attach our two together on this side. So we're just going to flip that over, sew it down. And again, since this is a bias seam, I am going to go ahead and pin it. Go from this side as our top, that way I can keep an eye on what all my seams are doing. Okay, last seam here, guys. So we're going to set our seam, press it open. Going to press towards all these seams to start because that other one will be easier to do. From the back, we'll trim up our corners. And you could also do that if you need to trim up your block at the end. Let this sit under the clapper for just a minute. Get nice and flat for us. In fact, I want a big clapper for that. Sometimes, like when one side of the clapper gets hot, I like to switch it for a cool side of the clapper so that it pulls more heat out quickly. Usually I just walk off and leave it for a bit. When I'm trying to show you guys a new block, I want to get it moving faster. So it's just going to need the slightest, littlest, tiniest haircut. Kind of liking this new mat, you guys. All right. So that's going to be one of our blocks, and we'll go get our orientation on the design board. So I'm also going to trim up my hourglass block just the tiniest bit. I like to make these a tiny bit oversized so that you do have room to trim it up at the end, because that's what keeps the blocks nice and straight in the center. Okay, so let's head over to our design board. Okay, so now we're going to lay out our block in order. So the first thing we're going to do is take our square of P, which is just the solid floral block. And then we're going to take one of our hourglass blocks and then one of our diagonal with just the floral on the top. So that's going to be our top row. So we're going to sew all three of those together. Then the next row is going to have our other hourglass block. Up, down. I have this one's right, left with the blue. This one's up, down with the blue. Do make sure that that's oriented the right way. You'd hate to sew it together and then have to pull it apart. Then we've got that middle block. This is going to be on this side. We're going to have one block of H, which is our solid bottom of the basket, and then G, which is our big square. So I'm going to take this over to the machine. I'm going to sew this row, then this row, and then this row. Okay, so I've got all my blocks together. We're just going to sew this top row, this middle row, and our bottom row. So I'll just take this top piece here and I'm going to flip it over and sew those two together. And then I'm just going to flip this one open and get my next piece and then attach these two. Now I do want to make sure that these two line up. So I'm going to double check those by flipping that seam up. And then I am going to throw a pin in it just because. All right, and that's our top row. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other two rows exactly the same way. So I'm going to have these two corners that I want those to align. So I'm going to get it lined up, flip it back, make sure it's good. And throw a pin in it there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this top corner. Okay, we'll flip it up, make sure we like those joins, and then grab our next piece. And then all we have left is this bottom row. So we'll take our two pieces, pair them together, and then we'll go press all three of these. Okay, same as before. We're going to set our seams. And then I'm going to press them to one side, and then I will flip it over and press them open. Okay. Throw that under a clapper for a minute so those seams will stay nice and flat for us. So now we've got our first row, our middle row, and our top row. We're going to sew all 3 of those together, and we are also going to sew on piece K. Now remember, piece K and piece J are very similar. I think they're like an inch different. So don't grab the wrong piece. We're going to just sew each of those 4 rows together, and then we'll come press them all at the same time. All of these together. Now, as you're pulling these together, you're going to have some intersections that you want to make sure you are aligning. So I'm going to get those lined up and then float them back so I can see, make sure that that's exactly where I want it. And then we'll do the same thing over here. Okay. So I'm going to double check, make sure I like where all those joints are coming together, and then I'm going to add the next row. So I know I'm going to have my blues touching. I'm going to line up this seam first. Okay. You can feel that seam buckling under there. So you want to make sure, since we pressed all of those open, that we keep them open. Okay. Check my corners, and then we'll sew on this bottom row. We're going to let those sit under the clapper for just a minute, make sure they're good and flat, and we're going to assemble our outer edges. Okay, so here we go. We're going to sew these 2 together to make a half square triangle. You can draw lines on this if you'd like. You could also use your seam tape if you've got that. The way you would use the seam tape for this is we're going to want to go 1/4 inch from center. So the red line for me is lined up with my needle. So if I line up the point of my square with this 1/4 inch line, I'm going to be sewing 1/4 inch to the side. So if I drop my needle there, I keep this straight behind it, then as it sews across, it's going to give me 1/4 inch from center. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, or I can just flip it around and do it again. So I could have run it back through and kept the point on this black line,
or I could flip my whole piece around to make sure that I get that 1/4 inch away. But if you're a beginner, I definitely suggest drawing the lines because it is always easier to sew on a line than sew a 1/4 inch away. But you want to have that 1/2 inch gap between the two, and then we'll go cut these apart and press them open.
Okay, so I'm going to take my 1/2 square triangle. I'm going to separate the 2 halves. Those seams are already sewn, so this does not have to be the most precise 1/4 inch ever. Then we will press these guys open. And then we'll flip them over and press them open. So the next thing we're going to do is kind of assembling this outer edge of around our block. So we're going to make 2 strips that go on 2 sides of our block. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is trim down our 1/2 square triangles. These need to be 1.5 inches. Want to make sure that they're trimmed to the right size. And normally I would trim on all 4 sides, but that other corner looks great. So I'm just going to do those 2. Yeah, I don't like that one as much. So this one I'm going to kind of center and do it from both sides. Oopsie. I'm not used to my rotating mat, you guys, watching me spin my thing around by picking up the work. I'll get there. All right, so now we've got our triangles trimmed and they will match up nicely with our block. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is attach this top row and then this left side row. So we're going to have our 1/2 square triangles with the blue part towards the middle of our block, and then our solid blue, and then this is piece D and this is piece C. So make sure we don't get those confused because they are slightly different sizes. Okay, so we're going to just attach this top row together. This should be pretty easy and straightforward. Just going to finger press that open for right now. And we'll attach our long strip. Now we'll do that left-hand side. All right, we'll go press both of these open. Okay, so now we've got the main part of our block pressed and ready to go. I've got my next 2 rounds, and if you're putting it together and your piece is too wide, then you know that's the piece that goes over on the other side. Okay, so this one's going to go across our top part. This one's going to go down our right-hand side. We're also going to go ahead and add this other piece of J. We already added K across the bottom. We're going to add J here. And so we'll add this one and then press it open, then add this one and press it open, and then add this one and press it open. So we're going to kind of work in a spiral fashion here. And I can feel that seam kind of wanting to fold over, so I'm going to fix it. All right, we'll go press this and then we'll come back and add our top row. Now that's attached and pressed open. We're going to just add the top and do the same thing. Now as you're lining this one up, you are going to want to make sure that those 2 seams align. So I'm going to pin there. Go press that open. Okay, so now we're going to add this next side. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up my important seams first.
Okay, so now we're going to do our last 2 rounds on this inner block here. We've got J and E and K and E. I'm just going to stitch those together. And we'll go press them at the same time. Okay, so far I have pressed all my seams open, but now I'm going to just start pressing to the outside. So again, if you need to just double check your sizing, if you don't remember which one is which, you can look back at your measurements on your cut list, or you can just line up your block. And so clearly this one is the longest one, so that's going to go across the top, and this one's down the side. So we've got this seam is the only seam we're lining up with. Okay, now we'll add this top row, and then the only thing we'll have left is adding our corners to make it all on point.
Okay, so the last thing we are going to do is get ready to put our block on point. I'm going to go from one corner to the other and just cut this in half diagonally. And then we're going to set this one aside. And with our other piece of F and A, we are going to sew from corner to corner. So you could just line this up and use the seam on your machine. I'm going to go ahead and draw the line. It's just long enough to do the job. Okay, now this is actually going to be corner to corner. So even though I'm using this other ruler, I guess I could have done this with just a regular ruler. Force of habit. I'm going to sew from that corner all the way across to this corner.
But if you don't want to do that bonus project, then you don't have to do this part. So I'm going to just sew from corner to corner. And I can't really use my seam tape on this one because my machine doesn't come out far enough. That's part of the reason I really like to draw it on with these bigger sizes.
All right, so now we're going to cut that half square triangle off. Again, that's my bonus project, so you don't have to worry about that. Now we're going to press this open. Set my seam first. Okay, and then we're going to cut this in half diagonally through our blue section. That's going to make the foot of our basket. And I normally wouldn't be doing all of this cutting on this spinning mat. I'm just trying to keep it all in the camera angle for you guys. So now we're going to take our block in the center of our design board, and we're going to put the 2 bottom pieces of our basket. They're going to attach here and here. And that's going to make our flat basket. And then we're going to have the 2 top pieces. So what we're going to do is head over to the machine and sew opposite. So I'm going to sew one bottom and one pure white, and then we'll press all that open, and then I'll do the other 2.
So that's one top side. Then I'm going to do the bottom part of the basket. All right, so we'll go press these 2 sides open, and then we'll add our last 2 sides. Okay, guys, that's a wrap on block number 6 of our Pieceful Basket Quilt Along. I can't believe we are halfway there. This was a fun one. I really enjoyed getting to make those hourglass blocks and did do something just a little bit different, kind of pushing me to go ahead and cut some of those on the bias that I don't like to do if I haven't already stitched it down. So I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. If you do, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. And don't forget to head over to our private Facebook group. I'd love to see what you guys have on your cutting table. And until then, I will see you guys next time.